we look forward to learning from you.
Great. Thank you, Mara. Thank you so much to My Jewish Learning for having me back for another Friday morning Parsha study. I appreciate everyone who is joining as well. Some familiar names and some familiar faces. So welcome back to everyone. And thank you all for joining. Our Torah portion this week is Parashat Re'eh. And it begins with a relatively simple and, for the most part, innocuous line. Um, and we're going to take a couple of moments just to talk a little bit about this line and some of its implications. Right here at the very beginning, it says, "See this day I set before you blessing and curse." So that's how a parsha begins, that I set before you blessing and curse. We certainly know in life that many things can be perceived as a blessing, as a curse, oftentimes as both. Um, it can be something as simple as if you find a lost object in the street. On the one hand, it's a bit of a blessing. I just found something. Maybe it belongs to me. On the other hand, now we have a kind of responsibility that we didn't ask for to try to find its original owners. Right? A lot of times, someone might get a promotion at work. Mazel tov, congratulations. In many ways, this is a blessing, right? We have more responsibility. We get to have hopefully a more positive impact. Perhaps it comes with a raise. We also know that this comes with more responsibilities and sometimes with more pressure. Sometimes the proverbial buck now stops with you, and that can be a difficult burden to accept. I share all of this because we're not going to talk today in depth about blessings and curses, in particular, because what follows that line, what comes immediately after for the next couple of challenges, is something that is poignant and particularly relevant today. And I think it would be obtuse to gloss over it and not mention anything at all. And we're not going to spend time talking about it because what immediately follows for a couple of chapters is the reminder that the Torah offers that God uses the land of Israel as reward and punishment for the behavior of the Israelite people. And whether or not the Israelites are in the land is considered reward or punishment for their behavior. And there are very clear instructions in the Torah about what the Israelites are to do when they enter the land and conquer it. The biggest reason why I don't want to talk about that right now is because whenever we hear that, it can be difficult in general. And certainly over the past 10 months, the relationship between the Jewish people, between Israelis, and we know that Jewish and Israeli are not always the same thing. We have Israelis who are not Jewish, and we have Jewish people who are not Israeli. The relationship between Jews, Israelis, people who are living in the land of Israel, and people who are in the broader regions in the Middle East, to say it's complicated is a horrifying understatement. It's complicated, it's difficult, it's challenging for so many of us. I think it's still important to know that a lot of our conversations as Jews and as people who want to learn about Judaism come directly from the Torah. And I think it's also fair to say that the laws for the Israelites who lived 3,500 years ago have impact, import, and relevance for us today, and also might not be applied in the exact same way for us today. I say all of this because I think it would be a little tone deaf to simply ignore the fact that this is present in the Torah. That being said, I don't think our space here today is one to talk about what's going on in terms of day-to-day life, the war, the challenges, politics, and policies. That being said, I do invite people multiple to reach out to me at any time that you'd like. I just posted my email again in the chat box. I'll do that a few times. And if people do have comments or reflections, I'm also happy to host a more purposeful conversation about what's going on. One thing that I do ask is for graciousness replying to emails. Sometimes I get to them in a couple of days, sometimes a couple of weeks. I'm entering the high holiday season, which is my busy season. So I might be a little later than usual replying. But if you do want to reach out, if you have questions about anything, certainly about the text or anything we talk about later, please feel free to reach out. But once again, Jews and Israel being its own country is in many ways many blessings, and it certainly brings upon it many unique challenges as well. And I certainly didn't want to ignore that today. All right, moving forward, I do want us to spend most of our time talking about chapter 13, which chapter 13 from our Parsha today. So let me share that screen. All right, there we go. And Mara, once again, if you'd like to put the link in there, I usually use Safaria as my go-to text. So if you want to read along on your own, please feel free to do that. Otherwise, I have my screen shared, and I will also do my best to keep an eye on the chat box as well in case people have questions or comments. The first verse in chapter 13, be careful to observe only that which I enjoin upon you. Neither add to it nor take away from it. Once again, this is a really interesting and compelling line in and of itself. On its surface, it seems to suggest that the only things that we can do are exactly what's literally in the Torah. Do not add to it, do not take away from it. And in some ways, that's somewhat freeing, right? Because if we have a very clear list of what to do, what not to do, what the expectations are, what the results are for following or not following those expectations, that often creates a lot of safety and security. I say this as a parent, I say this as a teacher, right? The more clear from an educational perspective, the more clear our rubrics are for success, the easier it is for our students to be in a position to meet expectations and really to shine to their greatest capacity. The clearer my expectations are with my kids for what our family norms are, the easier it is for them to feel a sense of safety and security. And hopefully, the more safe they also feel saying, hey, Dad, here are things I'd like to talk about or really discuss or maybe do a little bit differently. The flip side is this is also in many ways constricting. Do you mean we can literally never change anything? Because to me, that sounds somewhat tyrannical. If in my classroom or in my home, I say, I am the teacher, or I am the rabbi, or I am the parent, and my law goes unconditionally. That feels a little bit tyrannical. There isn't space for other people to have voice and to have influence and to have agency. So when we hear these kinds of lines in the Torah, be careful to observe that which I enjoin you, neither add nor take away. I read this, and now I am giving my personal. People are always welcome to agree and or to disagree. My personal read is that these are really guideposts. They're not necessarily absolute. And the reason that I say this is because if you look at the rabbis in the Talmud, there are times when they apply the codified Jewish law from the Torah in their time and place, and they apply it a little bit differently. So I don't think this is intended to be 100% absolute all the time. That being said, we have our guiding principles, we have our guiding laws, and these are the kind of guideposts that we are supposed to follow. And I see that Paula just posted in the chat the idea of Eitz Chaim Hi, right? Which literally means it is a tree of life. And when we think of the tree of life, right, one of the things that we think about is a living, breathing Torah and a living, breathing document. And that really gives us the capacity and the opportunity for us to be able to engage with it purposefully and meaningfully, with the understanding that sometimes today's context is a little bit different from the context of the Torah times as well. Mara, I was just taking a quick glance in the chat. Were there any other questions or anything else that that jumped up before I move on?
No, I think we're good to look at some more text.
Okay, great. All right. If there appears among you a prophet or a dream diviner who gives you a sign or portent, right? And by the way, this is interesting because in Judaism, we have prophets, right? A third of the Tanakh, a third of the Jewish Bible is called prophets. We also have dream diviners, right? The most famous of which is Joseph. So we know that these categories of people exist in Judaism. Yet here the Torah is going to say, if there appears among you a prophet or a dream diviner who gives you a sign or a portent, saying, let us follow and worship another God. So when we go back to that first line and talk about some of the restrictions or some of the limits, I think here the Torah is giving us one of those limits. Right? When we think about Joseph, when we think about the prophets, they are all engaged with trying to understand God's will, with trying to do our best capacity to follow the instructions, to follow basic human decency. None of the prophets, and certainly not Joseph, none of them is trying to get us to follow another God. Right? So here, one of these restrictions is if there appears a prophet or dream diviner who's telling you to follow and worship another God whom you have not experienced, even if the sign or the portent named to you comes true, do not heed the word of that prophet or dream diviner. This is such a fascinating idea. Because if we step back for a moment, as human beings, we tend to be results oriented, right? In other words, oftentimes a person is given a promotion or a raise if they bring on 20 new clients, or if they bring in X more dollars of revenue, right? Or even to be more obtuse, one of the ways that sports betting promoters work is brilliant. What they'll do is, let's just say that there's a football game. The NFL is going to kick off in a little over in 1 week from today with a game between the Green Bay Packers and the Philadelphia Eagles, born and raised in Milwaukee. Respectfully, Mara, we can stay on mute for there because I'm a Packers fan. So obviously, Mara and I are this is one time when we might not get along so well. She's going to be rooting for the Eagles. I'm obviously rooting for the Packers. And the way that sports betting promoters work is what they're going to do is they're going to call, let's say, 1,000 people. And they're going to say to 500 people, the Packers are going to win. They're going to say to 500 people, the Eagles are going to win. And let's just say, hypothetically, impossible of all the possibilities, the Eagles win. Half of these people now think to themselves, hey, this person was right. And then what that person is going to do is the next week say, I'm going to give you one more free result. They're going to pick another game. To half the people, they're going to pick team A, to the other half team B. And then all of a sudden, you're going to have a small subsection of people who just by complete randomness, that person gave them 3 free tips, all of which work. And then that person is going to say, now sign up, give me money, and I'm going to give you sports predictions moving forward. It cost them literally no dollars. And now 1/8 of the people after 3 weeks think that this person is perfect every single time, right? So boom, all of a sudden we're results oriented. This person has gotten 3 right in a row. They have to be the best sports promoter in the world, they're going to make me a lot of money. Right? So we tend to focus on results, not on process. And here the Torah is saying the same thing. If this is a false prophet, if they're trying to convince you to follow this God or another God or something else, even if their prophecy comes true, don't follow them. That is results-oriented thinking. It's not about the process, because we Israelites have a process. We have a relationship with God. Hopefully, it's a God in whom we trust, even if we don't understand God all the time, or even if we disagree from time to time with God. Hopefully, we trust that God, and we trust that God cares about us. That is a healthy process, even if the results in life aren't always perfect or what we would consider perfect. Do not go astray. We're going to see here, by the way, this chapter is replete with theology, which is very common within the book of Deuteronomy, and also not surprising because the Israelites are about to enter the land of Israel. So this is, in many ways, God's final reflections and comments before they enter. And then verse 5, oh, I'm sorry, the end of verse 4. For your God Adonai is testing you to see whether you really love your God Adonai with all your heart and soul. This to me can be a little bit complicated, right? Certainly the idea of loving God with all your heart and soul harkens back to Shema. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. Right? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. So this is a callback to the idea of loving God with all your heart, with all your soul. And whether we like it or not, the Torah seems comfortable with the idea that God puts tests before us. The rabbis seem comfortable with the idea that God puts tests before us. And we are supposed to hopefully pass these tests. So I don't know how comfortable we may or may not be with the idea of kind of testing our love, right? In a healthy relationship with a partner, we might not want to put tests of love before our partners, right? We might not want to try to trick them into doing something in order to catch them and say, aha, I knew you didn't love me, or I knew you blank. That's not always a sign of the healthiest relationship. That being said, we are talking about theology and relationships 3,500 years ago. And I think for those of us, when we read throughout the Torah, we do tend to see God is somewhat zealous and jealous, almost a little insecure of having the Israelites trust and love. I think that's a theme about God throughout the Torah. And I think we're seeing that here when God says that this is a test. Mara, were there any questions or comments in the chat that I might have overlooked before we keep going?
We have some big theological questions in the chat, which is always fun.
Please.
Are there prophets, maybe even today, that we should trust? And Ivan asks a question of like, how do we really hold a framework that says the Torah is flexible and also set in its ways?
Great. I'll do the second one first, not because it's any easier, but because I have a rather more brief response for that. And then once again, I will put my email. Whoops, that was the Zoom link. Sorry. I will put my email here in the chat box. So please feel free to follow up. To the question of how do we kind of figure out where the guideposts are, where to start and stop. For anyone who has seen Pirates of the Caribbean, I love that movie. For anyone who's seen Pirates of the Caribbean, there's a scene relatively early on where the female protagonist invokes parlay, where she can't be hurt, she can't be attacked, she can't be killed. She invokes parlay in order to go talk to the captain of the ship. And then she is essentially kind of a safe prisoner up until she gets to talk to the captain. And she ultimately gets to go to talk to Captain Barbosa. And she's kind of talking about parlay. And then the captain, being a pirate captain, is able to play a really kind of clever trick on words, and then have her be a prisoner on ship. And then at one point, they're kind of debating the laws of piracy because parlay is a law. And at which point he says, look, they're more like guidelines anyway. Right. So here you have this whole third of the movie setting up this laws of parlay, these immutable pirate laws and customs and way of beings. And then afterwards, the captain kind of shrugs his shoulders and confesses, look, they're really more like guidelines anyway. I think about that not to diminish the role of the Torah to a one sentence quip in a movie, but I really think of them that way, that these are immutable precepts. The teachings, the values, the essence of the Torah, this is what carries throughout generations and throughout milieus. And they give us guidelines of how to live them out to the best of our individual and collective ideal here in our world and in our lives. Because sometimes situations change. Sometimes there's a scenario or a situation that we could not anticipate. And we have to do our best to apply these principles. So that's how I look at the Torah when it comes to the kind of guidelines and boundaries on either side. In terms of prophets today, the rabbis teach that prophecy ended after the Bible. That's what the rabbis teach, that prophecy ended there. I think it's in part because we don't really know how to always discern true prophets. This was the story of Shabbatai Tzvi, right? That was the story of Shabbatai Tzvi from a few hundred years ago, who claimed to be a prophet. And after he passed away, there's really no compelling evidence that he was a genuine prophet. So I think we usually say that that prophecy is ended so that we don't put ourselves in a situation where we're following a false prophet. That being said, there certainly are people in the world today whom I would say have a prophetic voice. I saw someone in the chat mention Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. To me, he absolutely has a prophetic voice. And I think we can appreciate the prophetic wisdom of a great number of people today. And whether or not we ascribe to them the label of Navi, of classical prophet, I think is secondary, right? We can certainly appreciate the prophetic voice and wisdom of a great number of people. One other comment, and then we can move on with a little bit more text, is we're also taught about the Lamed Vavniks. Judaism has gematria, where every Hebrew letter is given a numerical value. And Lamed has the numerical value of 30, Vav has the numerical value of 6. So that's 36. We also know that in Judaism, 18 is a powerful number representing life. We're taught that in every generation, there are the Lamed Vavniks, 36 righteous people on whose merit the entire generation is saved. And I say that as well because even if we don't necessarily have prophets in the classical sense, there, again, according to our tradition, there are these Lamed Vavniks, these people whose righteousness in our world, in our generation, save even an entire generation. By the way, one of the wonderful ideas about the Lamed Vavniks is we don't know who they are, right? So it's powerful in a couple of ways because sometimes the people who do the most good are the ones who don't look to be in the spotlight so much, but also because it's possible that any single one of us could be a Lamed Vavnik. The statistical odds might be against it, but it's certainly possible that any single one of us could be a Lamed Vavnik. And what a wonderful aspiration that one of us might be one of those people on whose merit the entire generation is saved. So what can I do to live up to that holy ambition? I do not believe the Lamed Vavniks have to be Jewish, Ellen. I don't know what the rabbis say. I would suspect that traditionally rabbis would say the case, but in 2024, I think there are many, many, many people on whose righteousness their generations could be saved. Gail throws in too much responsibility, which is a perfect callback to the very beginning, which is sometimes things that appear as a blessing could also be as a curse. All right, let's move on to the text a little bit. Verse 5. It is your God Adonai alone whom you should follow, whom you should revere, whom you should follow, whom you should revere, whose commandments you should observe, whose orders you should heed, whom you should worship, and to whom you should hold fast. As for that prophet or dream diviner, such a one shall be put to death for having urged disloyalty to your God, who freed you from the land of Egypt and who redeemed you from the house of bondage, to make you stray from the path that your God Adonai commanded you to follow. Thus you will sweep out evil in your midst. The notion that one who transgresses law, that depending on the transgression, the punishment is death, that is not a notion that is exclusive to this verse in the Torah. We are taught about many, many trends that one who does such and such is the punishment is death. For one who violates Shabbat, the punishment is death. For one who disobeys their parents, certainly in public, the punishment is death. So the idea of being put to death as a transgression is something that's not uncommon within the Torah itself. So even if it might seem jarring to us right here, what do you mean we kill someone? That's not necessarily so extraordinary within the times and context of the Torah. And within the Torah, oftentimes it's the case that there is nothing worse than leading a person astray. One of the teachings in Leviticus chapter 19 and what's called the holiness code is lifnei iver lo titen michshol. Do not put a stumbling block in front of a blind. Colloquially, do not lead someone astray. Right? Do not lead someone astray. And when we talk about responsibility again, Gail, this is something I take incredibly seriously. Anytime that you are in a role of a teacher, and I use that in an incredibly broad term, right? And certainly in the more narrow term of a rabbi, anytime anyone asks me any question, not necessarily consciously, but certainly subconsciously, I have trained myself that I need to answer it with seriousness. Right? Sometimes it's a question where the answer comes to me very, very quickly, and it's relatively clear in terms of what Judaism might say or not say. Right? Can I steal if I see it and want it? No, Judaism says no, right? I don't have to worry too much, but I take every question incredibly seriously because as a rabbi, as a voice, as a teacher, if I do something incorrect, or if I give an answer that's incorrect, and or I'm in a position where I might lead someone astray, and I'm not worried that I'm going to be put to death for it, right? I'm not worried about that being the consequence, but I take deeply seriously that in Judaism, one of the gravest misdeeds that we can do is lead someone astray intentionally and even unintentionally. And I think the more conscious we are of trying not to lead people astray and trying to help guide people on their best path, I think we actually stand a pretty good chance of sweeping out evil from our midst, which is how verse 6 ends. I actually say that rather than being the sage on the stage, where my job is to kind of tell people what to do, I prefer to consider myself as a guide by the side, right? I can help guide people to follow their most authentic path and most sincere way. And if I'm able to stay true to that I'm really a person's guide to the best of my capacity, I do think I'm going to do my very, very small part to try to help sweep out evil. And I think that's something accessible for each of us. Anytime we're in a position where we're offering help or giving advice and or suggesting a direction for someone, if we really do our best not to lead them astray, to lead them on a genuine path, I think we could really take out a huge chunk of evil here in our. Um, Anything that you saw in the chat, Mara, before I go on?
Lots of good conversation. Uh, you know, people having feelings at the Lamed Vavniks and more. But I think if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. But right now, I don't know if we have any more text to look at, Rabbi.
Great. And I do see very, very quickly, that Michael mentions that you don't buy the concept of the Lamed Vavniks, and I just want to. I don't remember if I said this at the beginning. These are simply ideas and teachings, right? So I'm here to enforce the ideas and teachings and wisdom within Judaism. Sometimes I'm going to offer my own opinions as well. And again, please agree, please disagree. And that just because it's a teaching from the rabbis doesn't mean it's 100% canonical in every single way. That goes back to this, that not everything is 100% absolute here. So, all right, verse 7. If your siblings, or if a child, or if your partner, or if your best friend entices you in secret, saying, "Come, let us worship other gods." So this isn't the prophet who's publicly making a declaration to lead us astray. This is someone kind of, furtively whispering, "Hey, let's go worship this other God whom neither you nor your ancestors have experienced, from among the gods of the peoples around you, either near or distant, anywhere from one end of the earth to the other." Right? So let us go worship the God of the people who live next door to us. Let us go worship the God of a different country. Let us go worship a God at the complete other end of the world. Once again, do not assent or give heed to any of them. Show no pity or compassion, and do not cover up the matter, but take that person's life. Again, 3,500 years ago, maybe in context, that outcome is a little bit more common. That still always bothers me, right? It's one thing to ignore them. It's one thing to say, "Hey, I don't want to hear this." And it's another thing to actually take that person's life. There is a commentary, by the way, which suggests that the reason that we take their life is not out of punishment, but rather we take their life in order to save their soul. Because by leading people astray, ultimately they're jeopardizing the eternal life of their soul. And Judaism does believe in the eternity of the soul. So we take their life not out of punishment, but rather to protect their soul from the outcome, from the negative outcome for their soul if they keep going down this path. Whether or not that's a literal commentary, or whether that's an apologetic or a bit of a way for the commentator to feel better about this kind of harsh comment, really, the macro idea is anytime that someone is leading another person astray, that is so insidious to the person, to the community, and to the person leading them astray, that we need to stop that messaging by any means necessary, including taking the life of the person leading them in astray. All right, let your hand be the first to put that person to death, followed by the hand of the rest of the people. Putting aside what the action is here, there is a kind of powerful notion that we don't ask someone else to do what is our responsibility to do. And that's powerful as well, because a lot of times we don't want to do something that's difficult, or that's hard, or that makes us feel uncomfortable. So we want to dump it off on somebody else. And if there's something difficult or uncomfortable to do, it's my responsibility. And other people can help me with it. We don't want to drop off the things that are particularly difficult just because it feels too difficult for us to do. All right. Verse 11 gives the instructions. Stone that person to death for having sought to make you stray from your God Adonai, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thus all Israel will hear and be afraid, and such evil things will not again be done in your midst. Right? So verse 12 is the classic argument of a deterrent. If it's clear that the person who leads someone astray is put to death, and if it happens that when they do that, they are put to death, this is going to serve as a deterrent. We know there are lots of conversations and discussions and debates and wisdom on multiple sides about the efficacy of deterrence as a threat, but certainly that's something that comes up here in the Torah as well. Verse 13, if you hear it said of one of the towns that your God Adonai is giving you to dwell in, that some scoundrels from among you have gone and subverted the inhabitants of the town, saying, come, let us worship other gods whom you have experienced. You shall investigate it and interrogate thoroughly. Part of the reason I wanted to make sure to get to this verse, and then I'm going to give a little bit of context to wrap up, is the idea that up until now, these are things that you heard directly. Either a prophet went to the town square and started prophesying, follow another God. We've heard that with our own ears. Or someone comes up to us directly and whispers in our ear, let's go follow another God. We've heard that directly. Rather, in verse 13 and 14 and 15, if word gets to us that someone is convincing people to go to follow other gods, we cannot take action. We do not put them to death. Rather, we have to investigate and inquire and interrogate thoroughly. Right? As much as we would love to trust people, we do not take a person's testimony or hearsay as indisputable fact, especially when the consequence of that fact being true would be death. And this goes all the way back to Genesis, to the Tower of Babel, when the angels reported to God that the people here on earth were doing bad things. God says, let me go investigate. Because if God is going to punish the people, even though God trusts the angels, God needs to investigate with God's own anthropomorphic eyes and ears before bringing forth a punishment. And if we're going to punish people, based on something that we heard, we too need to be able to really investigate and make sure it's absolutely true before we bring a punishment. All right, I'm going to stop here so I can offer just a little bit of we can take a couple of moments and go back to the anything that that might have come up and or that I might have missed. A little bit of context. There are some passages in the Torah which seem difficult and or seem to offend our personal and or contemporary sensibilities. They simply exist. I think the verses that we read, for me, fall into the body of Torah text, which is difficult or bothersome or potentially offensive, or that we might just say, I think it's wrong. Those passages exist within the Torah. And in many ways, I think the easier thing to do would be to pick a different study, right? Because there's a chapter which talks about the holidays and the schedule and the calendar, and with the holidays coming up in a little over a month, we have other things that we can do, right? So I think one of the easier things to do is simply to pick a different chapter to study. I'll give you another example. When I talk to teenagers or college students who have had a lot of Jewish learning throughout their childhood, one book of the Torah that they almost never study is the book of Joshua. The book of Joshua is a violent book. If I were to have to summarize it in one line, it says, conquer the land and pretty much kill everybody who's already in the land if you need to in order to conquer it. Certainly incredibly complicated, once again, in our times today. So it's not uncommon that if you're teaching the Tanakh, if you're teaching the Jewish Bible to a 5-year-old or a fifth grader or a 15-year-old, the book of Joshua isn't going to be top of the list to teach. Right? So there are parts of the Torah which are very difficult. And I do think it's important that we engage with those texts and that we try to figure out a way for ourselves to engage with the texts. That being said, I'm not here to promote or espouse one way to engage with the text over others. I'm not trying to say there's one and only one way. One possibility is to say, look, if it says it in the Torah, it has to have truth, it has to have wisdom. And if I'm uncomfortable, that's my issue to deal with. I need to struggle with my discomfort because it's the Torah, it's the word of God, and I need to embrace what it says. Another possibility, perhaps, if you want to put them on extremes, is the Torah is allegory. It's collective human wisdom. And if it's allegory, I don't need to necessarily follow a word for word. Rather, I need to follow and understand what the principles and what the lessons are. And or it can be, look, this Torah was written for one specific generation, for the generation of the Israelites entering the land of Israel. Chizkuni, by the way, who's a 13th century commentator, that's one of the arguments he makes, is that these laws about dispossessing the people of the land and a lot of the laws in the Torah are written primarily, if not exclusively, for the nomadic Israelites and the first generation of Israelites in the desert. And when we apply them today, there's different levels of application, right? Sometimes it's guidelines. Sometimes we have the idea that we can, with our collective wisdom, apply some of these teachings a little bit differently. So there really are ways to engage with the text that aren't necessarily demanding that we take everything completely literally. That being said, I did make the purposeful choice that we study a text which is particularly violent and almost remorseless in terms of kill them, kill them, kill them, and certainly unapologetic in doing so, and which also have complicated impact and relevance with us in the contemporary world with the war going on. Because I think sometimes it's easier to sweep those texts aside or to study something else. And I think part of our privilege and responsibility and opportunity as Jews and people who want to learn about Judaism is to really learn everything that the Torah has to teach us. Mara, was there anything small or big that you think I missed in the chat in our final minute?
I don't think anything we can address in 1 minute, but
Okay.
it's always good to have more questions than answers. Thank you all for being here today. We touched on what a prophetic verse is, and I just want everyone to know that we are running a course on Isaiah and the Haftarah in the next few weeks. I will include a link in that in the follow-up. I also want to invite you all to join Rabbi Moishe Steigmann again for a class called How to Celebrate the High Holidays. I just added a link to that in the chat. And in our final minute, I've been in the practice of asking our Torah leader to bless everyone with an intention or a bracha as we head into Shabbat. So I will put you on the spot there, Rabbi.
Beautiful. It's my hope and blessing this week that the lines between blessing and curse be a little bit blurred. Oftentimes things come our way and we say that this is good or this is bad. And I think my blessing for this Shabbat is no matter what happens, that we're able to seek it out and try to understand what it is, just as it is. And sometimes we can make blessings out of anything or curses out of anything. Whatever comes our way, we're able to be present and hopefully use that to the best of our capacity to guide us and to guide our community this Shabbat. And may that wisdom and that strength carry us forward in the week ahead as well.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. Thank you all so much. Shabbat Shalom. And again, please feel free to reach out at any time.
Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi.
you.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.